Greg Wilson. I'm the Director of Strategic Partnerships at SharesPost. We are a digital ATS and self-clearing broker-dealer in the States, focusing on the private shares market.
PTK! That was awesome. After that, what can I do? Right? By the way, my name is Alex. I'm the CEO of Coinbase Japan.
I'm Colin.
My name's Tim. I'm directly responsible for all the words that came out of his mouth. Actually, where's Spotty at? Where's Spotty? So quick, guys, he was actually going to be a regional moderator. He had a family issue, and just to let you know where his priorities are, he left his family, which is in dire need, to come here to shield blockchain. So that's the lesson we should take home to our children. Thank you.
Okay, so since last economy, a lot actually has changed in the blockchain space. So here we are to discuss about it. So first, let's start with enterprise blockchain, DLT. A lot of corporates are actually investing in blockchain technology. So at this stage of development for blockchain technology, when we talk about DLT, we talk about enterprise blockchain. Does it mean anything specific? Why or why not? Tim, you want to start?
Yeah, so I actually had a unique spot. I'm not sure if Richard's still in the room. I think tomorrow morning they have a whole panel on that. So unfortunately, the whole phrase has been pretty much bastardized and kind of is very nebulous at this stage. People say the word enterprise or DLT, and it's pretty vague. I would say that if we're actually looking at like maybe a dozen companies that have some kind of legitimate claim around capital markets, that's the world that we look at. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder for the panel tomorrow, but if you look at the amount of funding that they raised, it's less than $500 million. And I know that sounds like maybe a lot, but that's only the course of 4 years, so maybe 125 million in funding for a dozen companies. So not a whole lot of growth in terms of recurring revenue yet. So it's not trying to be a downer of a panel, but yeah, we can come back to actual metrics and KPIs that we discussed last year.
Thank you. Okay, Colin?
I think that there's some really interesting things going on in the enterprise space. They have a very different take because they don't necessarily need to be out pushing a coin or anything. It's really about getting your head down and trying to do a job. Of course, not all of them are going to work, and we've been hearing about a lot of really big high-profile ones, including some guys that are just a bit salty here, deciding that things are not as golden as they were promised. It's not going to deliver absolutely everything under the sun, and I think a lot of that was foolishly oversold. But I think we're going to start to see things, and I know we've been saying this for a while, and we're going to talk a bit about what production means, but I think that we're kind of at the cusp of somebody going, right, okay, this DLT thing without a coin or with some kind of internal coin actually does make sense in a few specific use cases, and they're going to start to exploit that. Maybe that starts to become a bigger trend that people can build on the top of. I'm a real big believer in the portfolio concept, and I think in the public space, things like Ethereum have proliferated because everything has something else to build on top of and use, albeit very limited at this stage. At least it's bigger than doing it with isolation.
I don't know what to say about other than what those two guys said.
Make up something.
I could just say that, a couple of years ago, I think it was more for like an IR reason, where companies start saying, hey, we're doing blockchain or we're doing AI, then we kind of get some attention, right? But at this time, I guess people are really looking back and think, so what's real about it? Is there any use case? So I'm expecting that there's going to be at least a few dozen of real technology that just has a real use case out of it. And if that be the case, then I think it's going to be somewhat beneficial for the entire economy.
Okay, so SharesPost is implementing enterprise blockchain on several levels. Firstly, we're dealing in digital securities, security tokens. Right now, we're able to do that in an OTC fashion and are moving more towards an order book model. There's a lot of benefits to that I can go into later. But additionally, we have, I guess, more broadly, have a network called the Glass Network, which is an Ethereum-based network that connects exchanges for order book pooling and compliance. to allow exchanges to trade interjurisdictionally. And we have about 10 or 12 different exchanges, both regulated and unregulated, that are able to operate on this. And effectively what it does is it uses the blockchain and uses inter-exchange relationships to allow compliant trading both within and between jurisdictions of security tokens.
Okay, thank you. All right, so actually blockchain was the big financial institutions that entered blockchain space first, because this technology is seen to have huge potential to revolutionize the whole financial industry, to a fundamentally new way of funding, etc. So and we have this term called DeFi, decentralized finance. So I want to ask all of you here, like, is it really like ontologically or fundamentally different? What does it mean?
Okay, so I think, yeah, just referring back to my previous point about glass, that is fundamentally different, where you can have, in theory, you could have an exchange in Singapore, an exchange in the States that connect as peer institutions and enable their traders to connect trades and perform all the trade certification and accreditation of investors locally within their jurisdictions, that is, reporting to the SEC or to the NAS in the case of Singapore. So I think that the only trend that I see being interesting in this year is security tokens, insofar as that's, if there's ever going to be a wave of institutional money coming into crypto, that's when it's coming in. People, holding these silly bearer assets, these so-called utility tokens, is something institutions are just never ever going to touch. I mean, you own something that may or may not give you value on a network that may or may not exist, and it's not much of a value proposition for anyone. They can also, those could also be very easily stolen. When you talk about censorship resistant, well, I mean, if you have a bearer asset, that's something that can be stolen, and that happens all the time, as we just saw it here in Korea a few weeks ago. Whereas when you're dealing in security tokens, you're still dealing with traditional infrastructures and having centralized cap tables and things like that offer multiple layers of protection. So as far as enterprise blockchain, I think that's really the direction of where it's going, and that's where the real money's coming in.
So quick, phrase please. So DeFi, are you saying the bearer assets, which is what most of these people promoting DeFi are discussing, you're saying that that's not a world that will be moved towards because everyone wants to have immobilized, dematerialized securities?
Well, it's not that everything needs to be, I mean, fully decentralized. I think is just like it's kind of a silly pipe dream. Sort of like crypto ideologues are pumping this sort of idea. It's nice. I mean, it's nice to use the technology insofar as it's useful. But it's more important that it works within the existing regulatory and institutional frameworks, which have about 100 years of experience in this. So we can decentralize trades, and we can decentralize compliance, and we can have this glass network, which is a many-to-many relationship that allows institutions to trade interjurisdictionally, and so you can call that DeFi. But I think it is still very important for the traditional financial system to have some elements of centralization and some elements of control, because that control is very useful.
It's way too pragmatic. Yeah. I mean, like, DeFi, decentralized finance, like, the way I look at it is slightly different. I mean, finance is what? It's moving money over space and time. So what's different from what came before it? Like, I don't think payments on something like Bitcoin or Ethereum are DeFi per se. It's when you start lending things, when you start putting them in derivatives and stuff like that. And why is the decentralized important as that? They don't want to follow the rules. And that's the reason it's going to work, is because they're breaking all the laws. So decentralized finance is trying to hide who's doing these and say, look, I can't do it, sorry. So things like Augur is an example of a type of DeFi. Is like, I can't stop somebody from putting an assassination contract on there, so not my problem, sorry. That's the real value in that, and it's permissionless. So if we start talking about things like securities tokens and adhering to rules, we're not really talking about the same thing.
Regulated DeFi sounds like a contradiction in terms.
I mean, if you think you can abstract everything away and say, oh, well, it's decentralized, therefore I'm not responsible, the authorities will make you responsible ultimately. So I think this is kind of like a, one of these silly crypto fantasy pipe dreams that is not likely to be realized ever. People will be responsible and they will go to jail. So.
I think it's interesting
But
that,
not here.
like, we've got this experts here, but we still have different notions on DeFi, right? So the way I think of DeFi actually is, I'm just calling that, like, it's going to be open source, and it's going to be financially inclusive, and it's going to be transparent. And it's more of promoting, stepping back again and think about, gee, why did this blockchain thing came up in the first place? We've got decentralized exchanges like ourselves. We've got a lot of cool things coming along. That's really sort of more close to where we were in existing financial world, like SEOs or stable coins. But DeFi is more of like just step back again and really think about like what people really wanted to do. And this has not like really become their real use case here, but like I personally want to sort of separate the notion of like replicating the existing financial institutions and regulated stuff as to what these DeFi people are trying to do. So Coinbase support the DeFi ecosystem by providing a Coinbase wallet, which is so much different from like this crypto exchange place that we're offering as well. So I think they're two separate notions here. And I don't know about you, Greg, if you're thinking about the SEO in which context, but
I mean, yeah, I think it probably applies to security tokens in a very limited sense. But what it means for us really is greatly decrease the infrastructure and the ability to securitize a lot of assets that weren't traditionally able to be securitized, and offering investors exposure to things that they would never have otherwise. Under our glass platform, in fact, you could have a DEX that was trading security tokens compliantly. So there are ways to apply the existing infrastructure using blockchain and having some sort of DeFi element, but at least from the world that I come from, there's always it's never going to be absolutely permissionless and decentralized.
So actually, Colin, to go back to the panel before with the regulators, and they just mentioned the new guidance from the SEC. I know that both of us are obviously SEC experts because we passed the Howey test.
I'm a big fan of the SEC.
Yeah. So we won't ask and raise the hands for lawyers in the room. But no, question for you. I just challenged Greg on the term DeFi. If fundamentally we are moving these quote unquote innovators, these financial engineers that effectively are breaking the law, build something that has billions or potentially trillions of dollars of quadrillions of dollars, if it's PTK obviously, then at some stage these things can have systemic impact systemically. Do you feel that, or at least in your conversations with regulators, in your day-to-day conversations, do you see any sense of a desire for someone like the FSB to have some oversight on something if these things do become large?
Yeah, I think there's two aspects to that, and a very good point. So one of the things that I always find really interesting is you hear a lot of people talking about ICOs as kind of, what was really great about it is it got away from, particularly US, but in other countries, accreditation standards for investors. So you need to have so much money before you can invest in a risky thing like a startup. So I don't know how it works exactly in Korea, but in the United States, you need to have something like $5 million in order to be able to be on a list to invest in like a new startup. A lot of people say, well, this excludes us from some of the really good deals, and we can't get in until there's an IPO and something like the next Google. Which is understandable. I kind of get where they're coming from, but I think a lot of people are really not realizing that those rules aren't just there to prevent you from losing money if it's not the next Google, but because they know small retail investors will put in a little bit, a lot, and buy up the prices, that starts to destabilize the economy. I don't know, I know nobody here was old enough to remember this, but in the 1920s United States, we had something called the Great Depression as a result of people doing that. It completely exploded all the asset prices. And it wasn't just that everything went up and that started to have knock-on effects. It was that it also went down and people couldn't afford to buy food or pay for their houses or do anything else. That meant the whole system fell apart. And for about 10 years, they needed to figure out how do we get out of this thing, and that meant lots of inflation. So the things that people were talking about, Austrian School of Economics, they kind of go hand in hand. I think the other thing that's quite interesting in the point you brought up is how does this start to impact in how we can change these rules? I mean, there are arguments to say we should allow wider investment. I think education is really going to be the key thing here, and the SEC in the United States is also partially responsible for investor education. They're putting out things. I would argue that they could do a lot more within the token space rather than inventing Howie coin, which is a good way to show a joke as a currency, and I'm all for that. But they could be doing more to say, well, these are specific risks, but that means they need to understand it. And I think that's incumbent on people like us in the industry trying to work in STOs or work with currency exchanges or elsewhere to say, hey, this is what you need to know. And I think this was a good point out of the regulatory panel. If we're letting them believe whatever they want and we're not going back and correcting it, we just say, oh, that's stupid, let's dismiss it, we're really not helping ourselves in the long term.
So did we have a consensus on what DeFi meant then? Not yet.
Illegal.
Maybe next year, guys. Put that down as a KPI. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's like the definition of decentralized finance is I think not everybody has their own opinion, right? And I think a year into the future from last year, Colin and Tim, you're talking about like the last question on the panel is actually the application of this blockchain technology. So on the stage, a lot of things actually still in beta. They're not. Do you guys see any like real things been built? Like why still ever like we don't see any like big mass applications here?
We do, ransomware.
Ransomware, yeah.
Okay, so just quick, I know you guys laugh, and I'm not endorsing ransomware. So ransomware is what happens, it's data kidnapping. It's when somebody sends you a file or takes over your hard drive and says you have to pay us X amount of Bitcoin, Monero, or PTK in order to unlock that data and have it back again. It's not a small amount of money. 2 years ago it was $2 billion, and it's basically doubled every single year. So 2020, next year, it's supposed to be around 10 billion or so, depending on what you look at. And the entities that are hit by ransomware are typically public infrastructure, so or entities that are subsidized by taxpayers. So hospitals, police departments, libraries, and in the case of hospitals, these are mission critical systems. So you don't want to have to turn off the systems because you may have someone being operated on and they can no longer have their files brought up with the drug history. So I know that people will poo-poo saying, oh, that's not a use case, but it legitimately, unfortunately is, because if there was no cryptocurrencies, then there would be no easy way to liquidate the value that they're extracting from society.
So actually, I have a question here now. Yeah, we know that cryptocurrencies are being used for these illegal activities, ransomware, etc. So, are there any, like, is this the future trend going forward? Or, are there any things you can do to actually
I think Silk Road 2.0 needs to come back. I think that's a good use case. I mean, that's the killer app, right? Buying drugs online.
Yeah.
Point taken. I think tokenized assets are a major trend that is coming forward. Where you have 24/7 markets, inter-exchange operatability. You have the ability to tokenize things very cheaply. You have simultaneous payment and delivery. It enables us to securitize the sorts of assets that are typically only open to large institutions like infrastructure or high yield corporate debt or different types of real estate. I mean, for example, you could have 1 square meter of every building in one suburb of Seoul if you were so interested. So there's a lot of different ways that you can securitize assets and deliver those public, and I think create real value, and also just make assets that are not historically very liquid, quite liquid and interesting, and create new markets in this way. And then an initial part of Shares Post and a number of firms that we work with is the ability to create funds on these. So we have an RIA, which is a registered investment advisor. And we have something called the Shares Post 100, which takes the 100 most interesting issuances on our platform and creates a basket. And we're continuing to roll that out as well. So we create more and more funds, so there's a lot of interesting investment opportunities that come from that, and a lot of value creation with the ability to securitize very quickly. In addition to that, there's a whole ecosystem developing around that, where there are investors that are being specialized in this, various issuance platforms that are helping people tokenize their assets and bake in all of the legal infrastructure that needs to be, all the information that needs to be inside of the token and on the platform in order to enable people to trade compliantly. So I think that this is something real and something new, and that is actually coming out of the ashes of the ICO crash, and will have real tangible benefits to finance and to economics as a whole.
But can I ask you a question on that? Today, the technology could handle how could I tokenize and fractionalize square meters and so on. We could have databases do that. Is that not happening because of the technology, or is that not happening because there's no market for it?
I'd say the technology is definitely an enabling factor. Having public blockchains, or in some cases non-public blockchains that are really, you have companies that are say R3 or Securitize or Harbor or whatever, that are really building these platforms designed specifically for security tokens, with all the benefits that I mentioned, with the open infrastructure, the inter-exchange operability, the ability to perform certain types of audits. That's all quite new, and SharesPost, we do intend to support as many of those protocols as it makes sense to. So essentially playing Switzerland in that way. So if something is issued on any of the platforms that I mentioned, or even on a Oracle database, we can support that as well. But when you're talking about something that creates a many-to-many relationship, for example, I'll just talk about SharesPost itself. We have licensing in the States and draft licensing in 2 other offshore jurisdictions, and potentially a 4th, and being able to have those markets interoperate on a 24/7 basis, having the real-time settlement clearing and delivery. This is something that I think would be very difficult to do without blockchain. In any event, this is the method that we've chosen to go with.
Hashtag blockchain. Okay.
Do you have something to add, Tim?
No, I think you have a final question, so that way we could rumble.
Yeah, we still have some time, actually.
Stable.
Yeah, I was going to say, so look, everyone here is more at the core center of the crypto economy. So, you guys probably think that you've been here for a while, but it's only been a few years after this crypto thing came out, right? So, it's just natural that everything is quite at a beta stage. Mm-hmm. But what we come to think, and Coinbase will personally think, is that people, I talk about this whole crypto winter and what have you, but we see it as more of a crypto spring for the engineers or developers space. As Colin mentioned, there protocol or service like Ardor, or we've seen a lot of cool stuff coming up. Micropayments, lending, all that stuff, and it's just coming up, and it's so exciting right now. So it's all about the use case, and then whichever comes first. The demand will reach the use case first, who knows? But I think there's just some cool technologies coming up here now, of which that people is going to be interested. And then when people start using it, there's always the economy of scale, where at one point people really sort of have it as more of a de facto standard for something. And that's when we see it as something came from beta to a use case. So I think it's probably going to take some time, but the stuff that we're seeing right now, those technologies and those new services and protocols are just so amazing. So I have a great feeling about it.
What I've noticed on that, and a lot of people talk about we're coming up on those things. It feels like using Ethereum and some of these other blockchains, sorry if I'm saying that here, is a great prototyping environment. And a lot of people are using it because it's easy. It's easy to get to. There's lots of people supporting. You can ask questions, get answers. But then they're finding, there's limitations. It costs too much money to put it on mainnet, even if that's going to come down in time, and hopefully it will. Maybe it's not as secure as they need to have it. And it's okay, cool, we figured out an idea, we've raised some legitimate money. Let's go out and build this thing someplace else. And then when it comes to production, it will look nothing like how it started. Because at the end of the day, like a lot of these good ideas still have somebody, ultimately you can come back and you can put in jail if they do something wrong. Well, you can build that in a different system. And if you all of a sudden built a good idea that gets people using CryptoKitties, well, just go build that on a database someplace else with your $50 million. Boom, good to go. Like we've got a cool little game. And maybe you touch a blockchain, but maybe you don't.
It actually raised a question that we've talked about in the past. Actually, I think all three of us have talked about. If you're building something that becomes dematerialized and immobilized, so right now traditional securities. Yeah, so in the traditional securities settlement process, you have an entity called the CSV that effectively holds these rights, or in this case, the pieces of equity, in an electronic form on a database behind its four walls. The terms immobilized and dematerialized come in there. If we're dematerializing and immobilizing cryptocurrencies and these digital assets on a proof of work network, what is the point of proof of work in this instance? Because you're already trusting these entities, these intermediaries, to handle those processes in a KYC edge, all the edges. So there's really no symbols. What is the point? I mean, not to single out Glass, but if you guys are using Ethereum or some other network that's paying the price for symbol protection, or do you feel that that's a long-term, you plan to do that long-term, or are you guys going to be open to switching to other platforms?
Yes, certainly other architectures, or potentially.
You should be able to answer what the architects would say.
That's not really for me. That's a bit outside the scope of this conversation, I think. But yeah, I mean, certainly, I think it makes sense where you're talking about public blockchains that are open to congestion and 51% attacks and things like that. So perhaps private blockchains do make more sense for the sort of corporate applications. Right now, effectively what we're doing in our project is restructuring the whole private shares market. I mean, so this is something that existed for about 10 years, which we really pioneered in the States, and we've had our ATS for about 6 years. And right now we trade shares of every unicorn you've ever heard of. So like SpaceX and Airbnb and DD and Ant Financial and so forth. And at the end of the day, that's still quite a manual process, and that's just the way the private shares market works. But working very closely in conjunction with the SEC and with FINRA, we're moving that to a much more sort of blockchain model, really. Updating it to the standard of more established finance, where you have order books and APIs, and it becomes a much more higher frequency thing. One of the key issues with regard to that is transfer restrictions, which tends to slow down transactions. Something like transactions take like 30 to 90 days to close, and the idea is to really change the structure of that market where it gets down to as near real time as possible. And then there's some ripple effects that follow from that. We have there's a lot of venture capitalists coming in, so you have venture capitalists who would say be tokenizing their assets, but then able to get liquid quite quickly, instead of the trend now is to stay private for like 10 or 12 years or something like this. But when you have a fund that can get liquid, then you're able to recapture your capital and start a new fund. So it actually accelerates the venture capital cycle. At the same time, you're seeing a lot of these companies staying private so long that most of the value is squeezed out before they actually go public. So a lot of what we're seeing are many more institutions, say family offices, venture capitalists, hedge funds, that are coming on our platform to get secondary access to these private issuances, because that's really where the real money is to be made. I mean, if you're buying it as an IPO, that's not necessarily the best return you can get. It's better to buy it.
It was a good deflection, so we'll come back to you. See what the architecture looks like.
So back to our topic. So we're talking about the application of real use cases with blockchain technology, and now you mentioned that it's going to take some time until we see like real killer apps. So actually, I'd like to hear from you guys. Like, how long do you think it would take for us to see the real application of it, apart from ransomware, illegal activities? Oh, and push
So-
software.
Getting rich quick is already like in production, I think.
So I think one of the fundamental problems of these people saying killer apps or applications is the same thing we talked about last year, is the fact that for all of these things that require settlement, you need to have quote unquote cash on ledger. And you don't have, you have people pitching quote unquote stable coins, but virtually every stable coin that's being pitched is reliant on a commercial bank, and therefore you have credit risk that you as an entity, as a startup or a company building a project, have no ability to hedge against. And then these other, these synthetic stable coins, which leech off of, parasitically leech off of the exogenous unit of account. You know, for any economists out here, or sorry, any non-economists out there, basically these for MakerDAO, they are dependent on rebasing the amount of ether they effectively have into a unit of account that's outside of the network, and therefore you have to trust somebody for something. So my point with all that is the only way you can actually have this DVP, PVP settlement is if you have an actual real stable coin that's backed by effectively something like a central bank. Just complete disclosure, I'm an advisor for a company called Fearmatics, who's actually working on that with a project called USC. But yeah, unless you're working with a central bank, you're probably not going to be able to get access to something that has sovereign credit risk, which is basically the backstop to civilization as we know it. So please work on those if you can the next year. Maybe we'll have more than one project that actually has a real stable coin. None of these faux stable. They're not even. They shouldn't even be called stable. They break the buck, or they break the peg like every single week. I think even not to single out USDC, but I mean all of them. Is there a single one that hasn't broken? I think that's a better question.
I think there's some that are still valued at zero.
That's a good stable coin.
Good stable coin. I mean, I always have the question around like, are stable coins actually beneficial, or are they parasitic to the systems they're on? It's like, one of the really cool things about Ether and Bitcoin is like, if people try to attack the system and they're successful, they won't be able to get very much money for the money they've stolen. Like Bitcoin will drop in price. We've seen it temporarily, I guess, with ETC, but there's too much buying pressure from the shills on that. So it didn't really function as it should have, and that's why the people that did the 51% attack were able to make money on it. But really, if the markets were somewhat rational, and I don't think that they are at all, the price should drop. If we have a bunch of stable coins, wouldn't a miner just 51% attack and just take a bunch of DAI or USDC or something else and be like, well, I don't care about the Ether or the Bitcoin behind it? If we're really adding lots and lots and lots of money on top of these things, either the market caps need to be so big in comparison, like we need to actually have quadrillion-dollar market cap Bitcoin or Ether to support $100 billion tethers or whatever else on top of it. It's not going to be stable. We're going to have to do so much mining or move away from these systems entirely to something that we haven't yet proven. And if we're still talking about how secure this proof will work 10 years after Bitcoin, we can't just turn on proof of stake and say, yeah, it's good next month. Like, is this ever really a good idea to have a stable coin? Is it ever really a good idea to try to boost things across that quickly and add so much value on top of this, especially if we don't have recourse to it?
Yeah, so speaking of, here's a way to seek that into what you guys both do. So you guys care about reorg attacks, because you have different coins you guys support, and obviously you guys are using infrastructure, at least at this point with Glass. If you did have a world in which you had, to what Colin was saying, trillions of dollars of quote unquote external value being stored, somehow connected on these inherently reorganizable chains. Is that something you guys have talked about internally about like these edge cases a couple of years from now, if all these bullish cases take place?
I mean, sure. So as far as yeah, can you clarify your question?
So if somebody reworks Ether, how does it impact Glass?
Right. So I mean that's something that we need to consider carefully. So currently it's a private permission network built on Ethereum.
So we have to break into the office and
Yeah, you can break into the office or whatever. We're also a qualified custodian, so we do all the custody ourselves. If there's any sort of reorganization with the ownership of assets, that's something that we can unwind. So it's not immutable, it's not permissionless. So
why do you want to change? Come on, it's all about immutability.
I'm sorry, I'm not ideologue like you, Tim. But,
Obviously, I'm a hardcore ideologue.
I mean, I think that, I think crypto suffers from, I mean, just sort of, returning to the previous question, I think that crypto, or blockchain in particular, it suffers from sort of like, the curse of riches insofar as it's a technology that it ostensibly represents wealth, and it's also incomprehensibly complex, and it promises a lot of people to get rich quick. And
it's its entire speech.
It's his entire speech, and it exploded in value, so that we're way ahead of ourselves. So as far as the demand that we should deliver usable applications today is I think for any other technology that was fundamental new data structure with no real application, this could languish in a lab for 20 years or something like that. This just happened. Like a ripple, for example. But in any event, we are trying to build things that integrate with the existing financial system, and that enable markets to be a lot more liquid, a lot more efficient, and get access to many more people. And we're not necessarily doing this in the most true to crypto way. But it's a way that it utilizes the infrastructure and it is effective for what we want to achieve.
No. Yeah. Now, do you have anything?
Yeah, we're just going to say some kind of eyes of crypto economy people. The stablecoin might be, so much towards the existing financial system in a way that we're backed by the fiat currencies, we're backed by that stuff. And it actually boils down to for instance, USDC and USD as well, but it's more about making sure that it's collateralized and backed by the fiat currency, pretty much to really sort of absorb or include those people who have never been in a crypto economy, i.e. people who were more used to paying cash, paying settlement in cash, or using credit card, or what have you, right? So I think it's more like where we are right now is more about just getting those people involved in the economy. That's why I strongly believe that the stablecoin notion is important. It's a small step, but it's actually a large step to really get everyone involved in this crypto thing, so that people finally realize, hey, this actually is much cheaper, or this actually is much quicker, or there's more use case to it, possibility to it. So I'm really into this stablecoin in that sense.
So, but to the point you made earlier about stability, these things, they call themselves stablecoin, but they're not actually stable. So if you want to have mainstream users, as everyone keeps on pitching, then in your view, is it just a matter of time that makes inherently unstable units of account stable? What's Coinbase view?
Sure. So I would phrase it my view, but
good save.
Well, relative to other crypto, stablecoin is actually more stable, right? That's for sure. And the upside premium is just optimism, speculation from the community that there's going to be much more use cases. That's my take. My point being, let's say U.S. dollar and Japanese yen or Korean won, they're fluctuating as well, right? But those three currencies are actually being usable. And if I make my trip down to Korea and exchange my US dollar to Korean won, I can still do it easily, even though the funds fluctuate. So there is an existing economy that is actually doable by having a few multiple currencies that are more or less fluctuating in value. So that's my take on my view on the stable coins vis-a-vis being relatively stable as opposed to other crypto.
Where are all these stable coins moving on? We can see them on a blockchain. They're all on exchanges, right? Who's using them?
Crypto exchange to crypto exchange transaction?
Remittances.
So why don't you guys just hook up to each other and be like, all right, I'm going to send $1 from Coinbase to Binance. It's what you're doing at the end. Why worry about blockchain? Just be like, all right, here's some credit for that Binance revenue. Why do we need to go through the intermediary step?
You're saying should we just
you guys
use
make
some
bank
database
transfers
rather than blockchain?
Yeah.
Well, because that's not the only the use case that we're imagining.
Okay.
And I want to just not being have to exchange my fiat just come over to, Korea with my smartphone, just pay by crypto.
Well, I came over with my credit card, paid Korean won with my credit card.
I did. I got my stash of bills too, but I don't want to do it, in the end. I'm just going to come over by my cell phone. Just, hey, I'll pay by crypto.
But I like the real use cases that can be delivered by crypto that can't be delivered by anything else. The transactions that would be stopped otherwise, things that need censorship resistance, that could be acquired by a state because of capital controls or because of freezing money in bank accounts because it may be illegal or there may be a court order leaning against it. Isn't that like the real true use cases of these things?
Sure. And I mean, my take is like, the involvement of the internet is just so fast that the existing settlement infrastructure has not caught up to some extent. I mean, if you find a cool article looking at smartphone, and if you want to like read through, but they ask you to subscribe, what you have to actually do is like log in, subscribe, give your credit card number, and pay, and by the time you're done, you feel like not reading the article, right? But if you have crypto, which is relatively more stable, like stablecoin, you just say boom, just hook it up to your wallet and just pay in just one instance. So that sort of like micropayment, for instance, is a cool use case that I think could be applicable to existing internet settlement space, where it's not really catering at this point in time with existing infrastructure.
But you need to have really, really low fees in order for that to work.
That's very true.
And aren't fees used to secure the networks, like Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin, what do you mean? Bitcoin fluctuates. So
Bitcoin fluctuates, but I mean, you need fees to protect the Bitcoin where Omni lives, where Tether does.
sure.
So if you're paying those fees to secure the network, it would just render your micro payment use case unusable, right?
Yeah, that's something we're going to stop doing.
Thanks, gentlemen. I think we're running out of time. So before we wrap up, I'd like to, in the coin world, we love to make predictions. So, so before the next economy, so what are the keywords for blockchain industry that you see?
Oh, you're looking right at me. I'm going to say the same thing I said last year, which is the KPIs. If companies were successful in bringing in recurring users who use the platform every single day or every single month, they would be bragging about that. We see that with Netflix. We see that with any successful company that's seen actual real user growth sustained. Is they will put that in the press release. We do not see that. The only way we still find out how the intermediaries are doing is through lawsuits. They're being sued by their users or sued by someone who wants to, feels that there was some insider trading or something like that.
Yeah, are we gonna see it this year?
My prediction is I don't think you see that, but I hope people do put out KPIs.
Tron tweets a lot.
Say that louder.
Tron tweets a lot.
Yeah.
KPIs by tweets.
Yeah.
KPIs by tweets. I'd like to be more bold on some of these. I think some of these really big, high-profile projects, one of them may have just been mentioned, will be found out to be fraudulent. I mean, there's nothing backing these things. They've made a lot of promises and they won't deliver, and that's either going to be through legal action or just basic economics, where people go, oh, actually, there's nothing behind this project, so maybe it shouldn't be worth anything at all. And it'll collapse, and that's great, I think, for the ecosystem. A lot of people are going to get hurt. That's tough, but I think we need to start really thinking about, do I want my money in this project because it is a shitcoin? And I think a lot of the times the answer is no.
So, I guess the keyword is crypto inclusion. And so I come from a country, Japan, where the government tried really hard to legalize crypto and really facilitate. Shit hit the fan a couple times. People really lost trust in crypto. Just a nut case, and it was really sad case. Because it was good people and good government really trying to foster that, but there were just, a few bad guys who tried to take advantage of it. So, my job to really sort of regain that trust over it. But I guess the point being, we're going to really get more people involved in crypto. And by doing so, it's the technology, it's the use case, and it's being friends with the regulator, or sometimes have to educate the regulator, or the existing financial people. I guess it's including getting those people involved. Hence, the crypto inclusion is my keyword again. I'm hoping that in 2019, that's more, that's going to be happening more.
Okay, great.
And I would say shakeout,
Yeah.
where, yeah, I mean, where you know, there's just a lot of institutions that are operating in a, you know, extra jurisdictional, extra legal way, and I think just, you know, committing serial fraud. And somewhere, somehow, the regulators will begin to wake up to that and begin to crack down. I expect to see, you know, at least one or more, you know, very high-profile projects that are hit very hard, as they should be, and crypto and the actual technology moving more into the institutional space. Where you have Fidelity coming online. You have JP Morgan has a coin for what maybe for PR, but whatever, they have a coin and are building a blue blockchain team very quickly. As I've spoken to already, that, you know, the private shares market in security tokens are ramping up very, very quickly. So I think you're going to see a shakeout that's going to delegitimize bad actors and really bring crypto into the mainstream in a very legitimate way.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Okay, thank you.